you. Good morning, good morning. Won't you share with a friend or two? Good morning to you. Good morning, good morning to you. You, good morning, good morning to you, and many more. Good morning, and welcome to Dairy Dialogues. I'm your host today, Shantae Charles. I do want to thank you for your time and your attention. As we begin today is Thinking Thursday. In my prayer time, my reflection time this morning, um, the Creator began to speak to me about current events and just giving some common practical wisdom that I want to share today that I hope will help somebody else. We're also going to look at the book Failures of Forgiveness, what we get wrong and how to do better. We're going to look at what happens in the business of forgiveness and what happens when companies rush people to forgive in the workplace. And then we're going to wrap it up with I Can't Wait to Call You My Wife. And I'm going to try to do this within the next 15 to 20 minutes so that we have a little bit of time here to have some talk back. All right. So this is what I'll do. Let me start with the failures of forgiveness. I can't wait to call you my wife. We'll do that next reading. And then I will end on what I feel is very important information that I received and download this morning about some strategy on what we need to be focused on for these current events. All right. So let's start here. Failures of forgiveness, what we get wrong and how to do better. I'm only reading a small section today, as I said, because we're in Black History Month, so we're covering some other readings as well. The dark side. What happens when organizations try to rush employees to forgive? When organizations rush employees to forgive so that everyone can just get back to being productive, this points to the dark side of forgiveness at work. As with the hurry and bury ritual I discussed in previous chapters, and the tendency we all have to experience the fallout fatigue that I discussed in chapter 6, organizations may be tempted to ask or expect employees to forgive quickly so that the company can move forward. Now, if you think about the current climate that we're in and some of the measures that are being taken in regards to diversity, in regards to equity, and in regards to inclusion, you're going to have a lot of employees that are affected by these measures and standards that are being rolled back, by the silencing of people celebrating their diversity, um, by making things harder for people who are disabled. All right. So unfortunately, right now, in a lot of work climates, a there's a fostering happening of non-inclusiveness, and that is not going to be good for a lot of workspaces. And in the process of all that, some organizations may ask you to forgive what's happening in the moment. They may ask you to forgive quickly so the company can move forward. But rushing employees to forgive puts unfair pressure on them. It can encourage inauthentic acts of forgiveness. Fearing their boss's harsh judgment or collegial shunning, an employee claims to have forgiven even though the offense is still festering and the conflict has not been resolved. The benefits of forgiveness accrue only when forgiveness is freely given. Yet a person who believes that their financial well being depends on expressing forgiveness will feel immense pressure to forgive. Thus, organizational pressure is bound to fail and be counterproductive to the company's aims. While organizations should expect that employees will generally get along with others, it is inappropriate for a company to pressure employees to forgive. My boss pressured me to forgive, or I was fired because I did not forgive, is a lawsuit waiting to happen. Organizations should promote values and create climates that encourage forgiveness, but they are stepping out of bounds when they rush and pressure employees to do it the forgiveness way. Rushing employees to forgive also compromises their autonomy. Employees should have the freedom to choose when and how to deal with their own mistreatment. As I discussed previously, given our unique dispositions, we will all respond differently to wrongdoing that happens to us. And some people will need longer than others to be ready to forgive, if they ever are. As long as employees are not being disorderly or violent or vengeful, employers should be patient and give them the time that they need. A lack of patience can also reinforce abusive behavior. In the aftermath of wrongdoing, we unfortunately sometimes extend our patience to the wrongdoers rather than to the victim, particularly if the wrongdoer has institutional power, like a CEO, or social power owing to their race or gender. When powerful employees engage in wrongdoing, oftentimes organizational leaders will be patient with their reformation. They will give them time to transform, even while they continue to engage in disrespectful or unlawful behavior. At the same time, they will encourage victims to forgive by implicitly or explicitly pressuring them to quickly get over it. If companies sincerely want to create a climate ripe for forgiveness, they should resist these unfair, impatient, and coercive practices. Now, again, due to the current climate that we are living in, um, things like discrimination cases, things like civil rights cases are actually being suspended right now and halted by our current government. That's on the federal level, okay, not necessarily on the state. So also keep that in mind when you're talking about any discrimination you might be experiencing right now. You might find yourself having to pause on filing, especially if you're trying to get federal acknowledgement of what's happening, because unfortunately, right now, we have a federal government that has gone rogue. But that's for another day in another time to talk about. All right. I want us to continue reading from I Can't Wait to Call You My Wife. And what I'm going to do, because of the way that this book is organized, we're going to read a little bit about the climate, and then I'm going to take you to some letters. So we do have a section here that's nothing but letters from the formerly enslaved, and we'll read a couple of those today. But let's go to where we left off, which was the description of the persistence of slavery in the North and how it was different from what was happening in the South. So let's finish that, and then we'll get to the letters. And I'm moving quickly here. The persistence of slavery in New Jersey into the 1840s was particularly egregious. There, slave owners, with the help of judges and others, engaged in slave rings in which they used legal loopholes to transport to the South enslaved mothers with their infants who had been freed under the gradual abolition law. Not only that, but they continued to sell, trade, and auction enslaved people. So even though they had created this law, this gradual abolition law, where as people got older and they got trained, they were eventually supposed to be set free, they had human trafficking rings with the help of judges and others who were engaged in this trafficking, and they were still selling people after they had been freed and made free through the requirements. Okay? So We talk about some of the things that America has still not accounted for. This is one of them. Rather than follow New York in completely abolishing slavery in the 1820s, New Jersey renamed the status of those who were still enslaved. They were quote unquote apprentices for life, according to the New Jersey law. Slavery would have lasted much longer in most of the North if not for specific eventualities. Some Northern enslaved men gained freedom as soldiers fighting for the patriotic cause in the Revolutionary War. Others, like Richard Allen, would go on to establish the African Methodist Episcopal Church, purchased their freedom from their slave owners, and worked to purchase the freedom of their wives and children. By the early 19th century, a large number of Northern slaves had gained their freedom and lived in cities like New York City, Philadelphia, and Boston, where they founded institutions for free black communities. By 1860, the free black population in the United States constituted nearly half a million persons. This is before the Civil War, more or less evenly divided between the North and the South. But free blacks existed in a kind of quasi freedom. Antebellum black free black status varied by time and by place. Most states denied free black men the right to vote or to serve on a jury, nor could free blacks testify in court, which is why you should hold those rights very prominently and dearly. Being able to testify, being able to serve as a juror, these were things that were historically denied us. If a crime was committed against them, they could not protect themselves unless a white person was present and willing to testify on their behalf. And this is, people say genetically, but no, this is historically where you have a through line of white people who still feel as though they have to vouch for black people. Okay, this is where you have that through line of white saviorism, because by law a white person had to be present with you, vouch for you, or be willing to testify on your behalf. They served as a character witness to your life. Okay? And so we still see that through line happening with further generations today of white people who feel like they have to insert themselves into black life. There is a reason for that. All right? So don't go too hard on the white people who have been historically trained to do that, because it was law at some point. With echoes of US society today, free blacks were imprisoned more than whites in both sections of the country and more than slaves in the South. Northern free blacks generally lacked access to education. Many African American men and women, however, gained some degree of elementary education, and a few had higher education degrees. In urban areas like New York City, Philadelphia, and Boston, African Americans and white benevolent or abolitionist societies ran private schools for black children, starting in the late 18th century. The New York Manumission Society established the New York African Free School for black children beginning in 1787, before New York passed a gradual abolition law. Some students from that institution became prominent abolitionists and professionals, including Henry Highland Garnet, James McCune Smith, and Alexander Crummell. In Philadelphia, beginning in 1804, schools for black children were often connected with black churches. So when someone says, well, what's the point of the black church? We don't need the black church anymore. Well, most schools for us were connected to the black church. And that is still true today. And that is probably going to be true in the future as we see them attempt to dismantle the Department of Education on the federal level. Okay? Some northern cities eventually and often reluctantly established separate, largely inferior public schools for black children in the early 1800s. By then, African Americans who had obtained an education because of the financial ability of their parents or through schools like the New York African Free School established black private schools in northern cities. So we see that there's a progression. There's a progression of abolitionists helping black people to establish their own schools, or churches establishing their own schools, and then a move to black private schools in northern cities. By the 1850s, several young African American men and women have been able to attend Oberlin College in Ohio. Founded in 1833, the innovative co-ed Ohio institution with its strong abolitionist principles admitted several black students. Even before Oberlin admitted black students, however, at least one black man had graduated from Bowdoin College in Maine, and a few had attended that institution's medical school before the Civil War. In the 1850s, two other colleges joined Oberlin in admitting black students: Antioch College in Ohio and Wilberforce University, the first college specifically for black students, also located in Ohio and founded through a collaboration between the Methodist Episcopal Church and the African Methodist Episcopal Church. After falling on hard times, Wilberforce was purchased in 1863 by the African Methodist Episcopal Church and is still operating today. While a minority of African Americans benefited from strong or middling primary education, and a few went on to attend college, enroll in graduate studies, attend professional schools, or the equivalent, many Northern blacks were illiterate and worked as day laborers or domestics. Most Northern blacks only had access to menial jobs. When European immigrants arrived in the 1840s and 1850s, mainly from Ireland and Germany, many black men, women, and children lost even those menial jobs, which they had counted on in the earlier decades. Northern blacks competed with European immigrants not only for jobs but also for housing. Although not yet forced to live in one area of city, most African Americans in the North increasingly lived in crowded neighborhoods with the newly arrived immigrants. In New York City, where most northern urban blacks live, African Americans resided in every ward. But as real estate prices rose, they were forced to move into small basement apartments or hovels in the back alleys of poor neighborhoods. Blacks were also generally denied access to public spaces and denied access to public transportation. And we have an administration right now that is trying to work its way back to not 1965, not 1900, not 1868, not 1865. They're trying to work their way back to the early 1800s. Besides political, economic, and social discrimination, Northern blacks routinely experienced white violence. White mobs, resenting the presence of blacks, regularly attacked men, women, and children and black institutions. So if you want to understand how far back this country is trying to take us, I just read it for you. This is before the Civil War. In fact, riots by white mobs were common throughout the nation. As early as 1837, young Illinois legislator Abraham Lincoln said that mob rule was becoming commonplace. Now, I want to read you a letter. This is the voice of black people during that time. And this is important because yesterday I was online and Facebook, as they normally do, took me by a page that was ahistorical and white supremacist. These are the pages that Facebook is flashing to black content creators on social media, just in case you didn't know that. And I began to read the statement that this person had posted, and they were talking about the Confederate soldier side and the Civil War. And they were trying to paint this picture of black enslaved people being so loyal to the cause, being, willing to stay behind and take care of master's wife. I mean, they went on with this romanticized, flowery version of what went down that absolutely was not true. And we know it's not true because as we read these accounts, the account we read earlier this week, the enslaved people were so excited that the Union Army was coming that when they could get the chance to escape and head over to the other side, and they were able to do so, they did so. So, this romanticized version that some white people want to tell themselves about what actually happened is why it's important that we read what the enslaved actually wrote, the accounts that we actually have. I want to read you this first letter today. Her name was Lucy Tucker. Letters between enslaved people in this era often reflect the sale and transport of slaves to cotton planters in the Mississippi Valley from the Upper South. Separated from her mother for more than 10 years, when she and several others were sold into Alabama, Lucy Tucker dictates a letter, probably via a member of a slave-holding family, to her mother in Virginia. She asks about the family she left behind and informs her mother of her health and that of others with her in Alabama. In spite of her inability to comment directly on the slave system, Tucker, who hires out her time as a washerwoman, implicitly protests against the slave system when she expresses her grief at familial loss and frustration about her inability to keep abreast of her family's welfare. Huntsville, Alabama, May 20th, 1845. Dear Mother, I have never heard from you but once since I left, for I know not whether you all still live or whether many have not since passed. My son, Burrow, has been absent from me 9 years. He is now grown, but I have not seen him since he was a boy, though I hear from him now and then. Mary Ann, the child which I brought with me, died, as also Susanna, who was born after I came to this country in their 5th year. I've seen a great deal of trouble since I came to Alabama. Moses was drowned some years ago in Kentucky, drunk as usual. Scipio is in Nashville doing very well. All he desires is to hear from his wife and children. I've been very sick for the last 2 or 3 years, but now am doing well. Have a good husband and give the white people 25 cents a day. I follow washing, ironing. This is from your daughter, Lucy Tucker. Enslaved letter writers wrote as often to learn about the welfare of family members as they did to ask a free relative to purchase them out of slavery. Emily Russell was held in an Alexandria, Virginia slave pen with her grandmother, her aunts, and their children, waiting to be sold to the highest bidder. Although she does not directly ask, Emily's one hope is that her free mother, Nancy Cartwright, who bought her own freedom and was now living and working in New York as a washerwoman, would be able to purchase her. Some owners of slave pens permitted their prisoners to write to relatives about purchasing them. Cartwright, with the help of abolitionists in Washington, D.C. and New York, learned that the slave traders were asking $1,800 for Emily, whom the traders explained is said to be the finest looking woman in the country, and $5,300 for her sisters and their children. When Cartwright was unable to pay the cost of her daughter, Emily was sold for the New Orleans fancy girl markets. This term was used for young girls and women of African and mostly European descent who were placed in the city's brothels and patronized by wealthy white men. In the letter below, Emily pleads with her mother to rescue her. I want to show you the picture of one of the slave pens. And again, people who commit such things don't really have a whole lot of moral ground to stand on. This is the interior view of a slave pen in Alexandria, Virginia, circa 1861 to 1869. She wrote, My dear mother, I take this opportunity of writing you a few lines to inform you that I am in Bruin's jail, and Aunt Sally and all of her children, and Aunt Hagar and all her children, and grandmother is almost crazy. My dear mother, will you please to come on as soon as you can? I expect to go away very shortly. Oh, mother, my dear mother, come now and see your distressed and heartbroken daughter once more. Mother, my dear mother, do not forsake me, for I feel desolate. Please to come now. Your daughter, Emily Russell. Alexandria, Virginia, January 22nd, 1850. P.S. If you do not come as far as Alexandria, come to Washington and do what you can. Within days of writing her letter, Emily Russell died during the overland trip to New Orleans. She never made it to be sold as a fancy girl on the market. We're going to stop there for today. Again, I hope that as we read these, it will cause you to take pause and to think about the many countless lives that we stand here today as free people. We stand on the shoulders not just of the great orators, the great historians, the great abolitionists, but we also stand on the shoulders of people like Emily. Finally, I want to share with you what I heard in prayer this morning on current events. A few pointers here, and I hope that this will be helpful to you, as I know I'm going to apply it to my life as well. The first thing, when it comes to these current events, there are many voices out here. Pick solid, stable voices and stick with those voices. Listen to the people who have been consistent with you. Listen to the people who have a moral compass. Secondly, a person whose moral compass is off cannot lead you to a good outcome. So choose wisely whose voice you're going to be listening to in the coming days. Don't argue about how to resist. Stop arguing online with people who are choosing to resist in different ways. Resist on many fronts. Do your part in resisting, whether that's calling, whether that is a targeted boycott, whether that is a complete boycott, whether that is choosing only to buy your necessary goods, whether that is cutting down on certain companies and spending with certain companies. Resistance happens on many fronts. So stop arguing about how to resist. Focus on mutual aid and community care. There's going to be people around you who are going to be in need of help. Help where you can. Focus on mutual aid and community care. It is now time to vet your sources of information. Start using sources that have .edu. Okay, use sources that come from .edu sites, as government sites are now being compromised, and so is the data. At this point, we don't know how much data is being erased, how much data is being replaced, and how much data is being falsified because of what's happening in our federal government. Some of our government sites for data are being compromised. Love has always been the North Star. A person leading from any other premise will lose this war. So whoever you're following, whoever you're listening to, make sure you check their energy source. Is their energy source rage, unchecked rage? Is their energy source revenge? Is their energy source harm? Whatever their source is, you need to pay attention to it. Is it feeling disrespected? Is it insecurities? What energy are they leading from? Because the Creator told me love has always been the North Star, and a person leading from any other premise will lose this war. Finally, remaining in the truth, contending for the truth, contending for justice, resisting the oppressor, that is the work, and that work is sacred. So this is what I wanted to share with you today. We have got about a good 10 to 12 minutes here. So we are going to have the talk back over on Instagram. Please feel free to join us there. It's Instagram at Daring Dialogues, all one word, and we're going to have the talk back. Take care, everyone. Be well, and most importantly, be light. All right.